Okay. Welcome to the grant writing workshop for Region 2 Arts Council. This is the beginning of a series. And if we go over, we can go over now. I just got an email that came in that our second meeting's been rescheduled to a little bit later. So if we do go over, that will be okay now. But welcome. What we're going to talk about today is finding funding, because I think that that's the very first place where everybody needs to start. You can't write a grant if you don't have someone to write the grant to, right? You can't write a grant application or apply until you know who to apply with, and until you find, the kind of funding sources that you need. So I have all of your email addresses, and so I'll be sending out a PDF with some lists of some funders in our area that might be tough for some of you who live a little farther out, who don't necessarily live in the state of Minnesota, and that's fine. But it still will give you some ideas of where to find funding, and some of the funders on the list are national funders. And it'll give you an idea of kind of what to look for. So, I guess the first thing that I want to talk about with funding is finding the right funder. I think that sometimes that can be difficult. Um, and I think that one of the ways that's easiest that people never think of is look at other organizations that do what you do, or other artists that do what you do. You know, look and see who they've been funded by. If you're, wanting to be funded as an artist, what are other artists that do what you do? What's on their CV? What's in their PSAs? Who funds them? That's one of the things about us funders. You always have to give us credit, So it's written into the grant contracts most of the time. So they have to tell you who's funding them, because we demand it as funders. Look at other organizations that do what you do and see where their funding comes from. And I think that that's a really great way to do research that eludes a lot of people. It's something that people don't think of. And I think that that's a really great way to find funders. And then also, you can look for local funders often that way. If you're looking for other local, or looking at other local organizations in your area that do the same thing. So I think that's an underutilized way of finding funders. Um, but you can also research funders in your geographic area, your town, your county, your region, your state. You can utilize grant clearinghouse websites, for or software like Grant Station or Foundation Search. And I have links to those in the PDF that I'm going to send out. But there are software that you can apply, that you can subscribe to, not apply to, subscribe to, um, that actually can help you find grants. But do research on that. Some of those uh, kinds of software, uh, they don't necessarily serve the arts. Sometimes they serve a particular sector. You might find all the grants you want if you're in the health sector, or, you're doing human welfare type of stuff, but it might be harder to find something in the arts. Just be aware of that before you subscribe. And also, and this one I would write down. I see a lot of you are taking notes. Um, One of the places that you can get Grant Station for quite, a discount is TechSoup.com. And TechSoup.com, what they do is they gather donations of software from lots of different sources, and then they pass that donation on to you for a small fee. you know? But it's certainly much cheaper than buying the software outright. And as long as you can prove your nonprofit status, um, you can get these donations for pretty reasonable prices. And sometimes that really helps with trying to get, a subscription to a software, especially like Grant Station. I do know that they do Grant Station. So that's something that you can do. You can research different types of funders too, depending on what you're interested in. So let's talk about types of funders. Like, what do you mean types of funders? What kind of types of funders are there? Well, there's lots of types of funders, actually. Um, there's corporate funders. Some corporations offer funding in the state of Minnesota, a really large corporation here is 3M, right? And 3M has a whole corporate, you know, foundation program. Many of large corporations, they actually have their own foundation that's just for their charitable giving. Blandin Foundation is another one in our area that gives out a lot of grants to organizations to do different things, or even individuals. They have a really great like cultural leadership program that a bunch of people have gone through, and it's really a fantastic program. So sometimes they offer, programs that are really helpful too, not just grants. And then of course there's government agencies in our area, we have the Minnesota State Arts Board. If you're trying to get arts funded in the state of Minnesota, they're a great resource. We also have our regional arts councils. So maybe I'll show you some of these things. We'll take a little bit of a time. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So this is the PDF that I'm going to send you. You can see that it has our website on it, of course, but also, in case you're elsewhere in the state of Minnesota, you can uh, access other regional arts councils here. It's actually on the Minnesota State Arts Board website, and you can see which counties in Minnesota they cover. So that's a place to get funding. There's also, the Minnesota State Arts Board proper, and they have funding if you click on their grants for both individuals and organizations and arts and cultural heritage programs. So there's a lot of arts funding in the state of Minnesota. It's a really rich place to be able to fund arts things. Let's go back to that PDF. Some things that people don't even think of in local resources. I know in our area, Beltrami Electric Co-op, they actually have, I must have, well, I'll have to fix that link. But they have a funding program that's called Operation Roundup. And your local electric co-op might give out small grants for different kinds of community projects and things like that. So that's a place to look. Um, and then, the Minnesota Historical Society is also a statewide government agency that gives out grants. So it's not just in the arts. There are other places that give out grants. And then, of course, there's federal grants. Now, federal grants, they can be a little more daunting. So if you're a beginning grant writer, I would say start with local grants. Start with that, Beltrami Co-op grant. Start with a Region 2 Arts Council grant, or your local regional arts council, or local agencies that do what you do, or who might support what you do, who give out grants. I think that local is a good place to start. Usually local funders usually have less red tape uh, to borrow a phrase, or their ways of applying are usually much simpler than something at a state or federal level. And, that's for a very good reason. At state or federal level, those agencies are often dealing with hundreds and sometimes thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of applications, and they have to weed those out somehow. And so if you don't do everything just exactly right, you haven't answered one question, you haven't checked that one box, it can totally throw out your application because they're sorting through so many and they have to have some sort of sorting process. So,
Mhm.
those kinds of applications can be a little more of a chess game, instead of more partnering process. When you have a funder who is close at hand, who is a local funder, often you can meet with them face to face. You can call them on the phone. They're often more responsive, and they're often more interested in what you're doing because they live in the community too. So, that's just a thought of, if you're a starting grant writer, maybe work up to those state and federal levels. Although, the Minnesota State Arts Board recently, I've heard from a lot of grantees. So people who have been granted by the State Arts Board in my area, they have said that the Minnesota State Arts Board has been much easier to apply for in the last few years. They've really changed their applications to make them more accessible to regular humans. So that's good. So, remember that you never know. The best thing to do is to go check it out. So to go to their website and look and see what they have to offer. And then you can see that I have foundations on here. So there's a lot of private foundations that also that can fund you in different ways. The Northwest Minnesota Foundation is a local one here in Bemidji. But the McKnight Foundation, they're a statewide foundation. They fund us. So all of our programs for individual artists are funded through the McKnight Foundation. And it's a really huge foundation, and they give out millions of dollars to be regranted by organizations like us. So there's a lot of really great and interesting stuff there. The Jerome Foundation, they fund arts organizations as well as individual artists. So they are worth a look. They're a state level type foundation. And then, I threw in here the Mellon Foundation as well. So, they're a huge foundation that funds all across the country, and they're at a really much larger level, but you can see that they do give out arts and culture grants, and they talk to you about, like different strategies that they utilize. And, when you get to how to apply, it says, they do not make grants directly to individuals. Their grants are a result of invitations issued by them. And you'll find that in a lot of foundations is that they have to issue a um, invitation to you to apply, if you want to apply with them. So, they can be a little more the harder nut to crack, a little bit more research and work on your part. You kind of have to court them to get on their radar so that maybe they will ask you to apply. So, like I said, it's a building process in your funding journey, in your idea of how to find funding. So, here's some of the grant search software. So I have links to that I'll send you. If you're an individual artist, oh, I hate those little Japanese beetles. Get out of here. Sorry, I have a lot of them in my house right now, as many of you probably do. Um, Springboard for the Arts is a fantastic resource for individual artists in the state of Minnesota. They have all sorts of great stuff here. Not only do they have grants that you can apply for, they have residencies, they have programs that you can apply for. They can help you out with healthcare, finding healthcare for you as an individual through your business, arts business. They have a lot of really great resources there. They have job opportunities if you want a job in the arts. So they're really worth a look. And then, these are more broad type of places that you can look for individuals. Artwork Archive is something that you would subscribe to, sort of like, we talked about Grant Station and we talked about Foundation Search for organizations. Well, this would be, the same type of thing, but for individual artists. So you can see, that you don't have to subscribe to be able to find what's out there. You can just go to their website and look. But they also have a lot of other things that they can that you can utilize as individual artists. And they send out emails. You can sign up for their emails, and they tell you about arts opportunities and stuff. So there's a lot of really great stuff going on there. And Artist Trust is a very similar type of site. And then we also have, I wanted to put on here grants specifically for Indigenous artists. There's some great places to look. The First Peoples Fund is a really fantastic organization out of South Dakota. And they fund a lot of individual artists. And they do a lot of really great stuff, and they do cover Minnesota. I'm not sure if they cover Michigan, but I do know that they cover Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. But I also think that a lot of their grants for individual artists can be applied for by anybody because in the country, because I've seen artists who have been fellows who are from Maine, they're Penobscot, they're from Washington State, they're from Hawaii. So they fund a lot of different kinds of artists. So it's a great resource. And then I also put on here the Arts and Culture Foundation, which is an even larger foundation that also does grants. Oh, well, I gotta fix that one too. See, I made this today. It's a good thing I'm clicking through some of these because I'll have to fix them before I send this out to you. But anyway, that's the PDF that I'll be sending out to you so that you have some ideas of where to look, at least for arts funding. But some of you might not be looking for arts funding, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. You might be looking for other kinds of funding. But there are lots of places to look. So to get back to looking for funding, you can research funders in your area of interest. Okay. So if you're not an artist and you're not looking for arts funding, which is that's what we do, that's what I know the most about, then look for funding in your area of interest. Are you doing, I don't know, youth programming in the arts for gardening? I don't know, gardening with disabled veterans. I
How
don't
about 55 and
vet care
over?
for feral cats. I don't know.
How about
You know
55 and over community?
what?
How about the 55 and over community?
Right, the
Northern
55 and over
Minnesota.
community. I'm
And it's
certain that there are
multiple.
probably lots of funders out there who really focus on that community. So go find who they are and take advantage of that. So, I think it helps to know exactly what you're trying to fund. So I think that's the next step with looking for funding is the more you know about what you can fund, the more you can find the right funders, I mean, and maybe even partners. maybe you can partner with other nonprofits in your area that do what you do. Maybe you can do a joint large project that you wouldn't be able to do alone. You wouldn't be able to get the funding for alone. Maybe you can apply together for a larger grant. There's a lot of different things that you can do to help you succeed. So those are thoughts. So also, just when we're talking about funding things and we're talking about grant funding, there are other types of funding. So always remember that too. I mean, as you're looking at this process, ask yourself, is grant funding the right step for you? Is a grant really what you should be looking for? Um, you know, um, would a GoFundMe site work better for what you're trying to do? Would a fundraising event work better for what you're trying to do? Like a dinner gala or something of that sort, or some sort of performance that people come to and buy tickets, or would it work better for you if you're already a performing arts type of arts organization? Maybe getting sponsors to pay for ad space in your program works better for you, or maybe you're charging membership dues to the people who work with your organization, who interact with what you do. Maybe that's the way to make some money. Maybe selling tickets to your event, or charging registrations to your workshops, or selling your arts merchandise. Maybe those things are going to cover your expenses better or easier than writing for grants. So, or maybe those things are just going to, supplement. Maybe those are your bread and butter things, and then you're also going to write for a grant and hope that you get it. So, just kind of ask yourself that question as you're looking for funding. I think that it's just a really important question to ask yourself before you step into applying for grants, because one of the things that we all know about applying for grants, if you've applied for them before, and maybe you don't know this because you haven't applied for them before, is that it's never, ever, ever a guarantee of funding. Never. It's a competition. It's
Mhm.
always a competition. You're writing a grant application, and other people are writing grant applications too. And for our process, we get together a community panel that reads through the applications and scores them, and then that gets approved by our board. So we kind of have a two-step process. Some of the smaller foundations, maybe they only have one person reading the grants. Maybe they have three or something like that. Maybe it's a small committee that reads the grants. But there's always somebody making that funding decision, whether it's a board, whether it's a grant panel, whether it's that one person. There's always somebody making that funding decision. And it's always a yes or a no. Either you're funded or you're not funded, right? So, just be aware of that. And the name of the game, I am here to tell you, the name of the game with
Right.
grants funding is don't give up. Keep applying, and keep applying to that funder, because you never know necessarily why you didn't get the grant. It might not be, it's so easy to get in your head and say, oh, I didn't get that grant because I'm a terrible grant writer. That might not be it. Maybe
It
you're a
will be for me.
fantastic grant writer, but somebody else had a better idea, or better fit their values of the funder, or whatever it is, or they had three grant writers working on this and you're one person. I mean, it's really hard to know why you weren't funded, and sometimes you don't always get the feedback. If they have feedback, though, take that on board and make a better application next time. But the name of the game really is persistence. It really is. It's as easy and as difficult as that because persistence is hard, right? Especially after, crushing defeat. Ugh! Um, but it really is how people get funded. It really is. And that's how you learn as a grant writer. You have to write some applications that don't happen to learn how to write applications that do happen, right?
Mhm.
So it's an experimentation process. It really is. But let me give you some tips. So let's go to some grant writing tips. So first of all, researching the funders, okay? So once you've got that funder website or you've got a few funder websites that you're looking at, the first thing you should do is look at their grant programs and read. Read, 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 read. Lots of times they have these long grant guidelines, and it's a whole separate document. And I know sometimes you look at it and you think, too long, can't read, can't do it. And and I hear you, but you got to make yourself do it because it's really important information. Because the number one question that you have to answer when you're looking at these grant programs, and sometimes you can answer it really quickly because maybe they have eligibility requirement of a very small geographic area and you're not in that geographic area. Done. Move on to the next one. You can't get that grant. So it's eligibility. Look at those eligibility requirements. Are you eligible? Answer that question first, because if you're not, move on to the next one. So answer that question first. Are you eligible? Don't waste a lot of time looking at other things. Look at are you eligible first,
I
and
have a
then see
question.
what they can do for you. You know what I'm saying?
I have a question on that
Yes,
note.
please.
So, our program brings in a very wide variety of programs. They're all educational, but I'll have artists, I'll have authors, I'll have demonstrations. We don't charge, our bylaws are that we cannot charge for anybody. We have voluntary membership and donations. So when I even read the Region 2 Arts Grant, I just saw somewhere where it said educational programs too. Somebody had told me a while ago it was strictly art programs, like art, and authors.
We fund arts and culture programs. So there has to be some sort of arts or cultural part of, what you're doing. So
Okay,
yeah,
so my
arts is a
biggest
big deal about what we fund.
Okay, so Arnkind, he does not reenactments, but he does educational programs of historic wars. So say, for instance, he's coming to do the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War on that date, April 19th of next year.
Is it a performance?
It is, it is so immersive.
Wow.
He does the history, he does a reenactment.
If
He
he's doing
did
a
World War,
reenactment,
he did World War
lost my
II.
light.
But he did a presentation, he had video, he involved the audience in reenacting, and it was beyond incredible. I mean,
Awesome.
there were no words. So he's going to do the 250, but it's a very expensive one. It's above our top end of our budget
Okay.
for a single person.
So
So
if you're going to write to me for a grant for it, you're going to write a grant application. I'm an arts funder. So you need to tell me about the performance part of this. How it's a theatrical performance, how it's a performance, how it's performance art. I don't know how you want to talk about it. But yes, you can talk about the educational part as well. Absolutely. But as far as the arts part, you have to talk about that it's a performance. I mean, how is that any different than a theatrical performance, a concert? Yes. So
yeah, it's like
definitely,
none of those.
because I'm an arts funder, you have to tell me about the arts part of it. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
Like if I was a strict education funder, then you'd have to tell me the education part about it. If you were writing to the Minnesota Historical Society grants, you would have to tell them about the historical part of it. So, kind of be aware of what your funder is looking for. Does that make
See,
sense?
this is one program of 9. So this is more my challenges because
Well,
I have
maybe we're just
authors.
funding this one program to
No,
help
I'm
you,
funding
you know?
9. I'm funding, need to fund 9 of them.
Right, but I mean, you got to start somewhere,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And
So
I've got artists.
maybe if we can help, if we can fund this whole entire one program, then you have more funds available, from the funds that you have for your organization to fund the rest of them,
Mhm.
So maybe getting one funded is a huge step in freeing up your budget. Or if you can get one funded through one place, then maybe you could move on and apply to get the other one funded someplace else. I mean, yeah, it's hard. I mean, you might be able to find places that will be a one size fits all for you, like something that really focuses on education for adults. If you can find a funder that really focuses on education for adults, then maybe you can write to fund, all 9 of them. So, that's another thing. You kind of have to look at how the funder can best help you. Like, do they fund what you need? You know what I mean? So you might want to look at the types of funding that they have too. Like, some organizations that, some funders will fund, operating support. And operating support is hard to find compared to project support because, one of the things that we funders like to do is we have our own mission, right? So we're trying to fund others that will further our mission. So always look at their mission statement. Look at that mission statement and see what they're looking for, what they're trying to fund. This is really helpful, especially with foundations, because they're trying to further their mission through funding you. That's where they're putting their money. They're trying to further whatever it is they're trying to do by funding you because you're doing the same thing. So that's why it's really smart to look for funders who are doing the same thing that you're doing. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, it's a partnership process almost. I mean, really, uh, it's not that big a partnership in that often as funders, we hand over that check and then we get to say, yes, we did that thing because we gave them money, you know?
Can you tell me the difference between the operating support
Yes,
and the project support? Could you give
yes.
examples?
So project support supports a program that you're doing. Okay. So maybe you're buying supplies, maybe you have to rent a space, maybe you're paying for people who are working on the event, like artists that you have coming in, or performers that you have coming in, or presenters that you have coming in. And that's all hung up in that program because they're just coming for that program. It's all about that program. Where operating support, which is harder to find, but really worth it to apply for. Operating support supports your operations as an organization. So it can fund things like, keeping the lights on. It can fund things like sometimes like rent. It can fund things like insurance. It can fund things like accounting. It can fund things like sometimes they even fund construction projects and things like that. It can fund staffing. That's the big one. That's the big one for organizations. It can fund staffing. So operating support can fund some of those, keep the lights on type of things that we all need, especially staffing, because we all know as nonprofits that we never have enough staff, to do all the things. Um, which grant writing is often one of. But yeah, operating support means that it can fund those types of things. But there are other things that sometimes, you can get funding for, like research and innovation and things like that. I mean, you really have to read Unfortunately, that's a big part of grant writing and getting funding. You have to read. You have to read. You have to read. You have to read those guidelines. You have to read their mission. You have to read other people that have been funded. Lots of times, if you look at their awards and look who they've been funding, you'll have a better idea of whether you fit in what they're trying to fund. So a big part of this research is reading. Like you want to know, like, can you just apply or do you need to be invited or vetted in some way? Like we saw on the Mellon Foundation that you need to be invited. That's important stuff to know. So, you know, and you want to know too, we haven't talked about funding cycles, but you need to know if their funding cycle fits in there in your timeline, because the bigger the grant, usually the longer the funding cycle. And sometimes that means, that uh the longer you have to wait, you know? I mean, grant funding is not immediate. If you get donors or if you do a fundraising gala and get a bunch of donations that way or whatever, you get ticket sales, those things are all immediate. Grant funding is not immediate. It is not. Sometimes you might have to wait up to a year after you put in that grant application before you even find out if you're funded. So really what that means is keep writing, keep writing, keep writing, write more grant applications. I mean, I wouldn't say do it scattershot. Just keep writing grant applications, because then you're not writing probably the best grant applications. You really want to target the funders that do what you do, that you're eligible for, that are really going to be a good fit, and then keep writing to them. And oftentimes, once you're funded and you have your foot in the door, you have a better chance of being funded again. So, keep writing. But sometimes, especially if you're writing for like a federal grant, if you're writing to some federal agency for a federal grant, those are the ones that often have the long timelines because government bureaucracy. And also, like I said, sometimes they're dealing with tens of thousands of grants. So, you know, uh, sometimes you just have to wait, and it's a long timeline. But if you know that you're going to have this big one that you're hoping to reel in, maybe you're applying for a large amount, $100,000 or something like that, and you're hoping that's your big hope, that's your hopeful lottery payoff, blah blah blah. Great, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. Apply to some of your local funders for maybe the smaller project grants or things like that to keep things going as you hope to reel in the whale. You know what I mean? You got to eat some little fishes while you're waiting on that whale to keep going. You know what I
We
mean?
had we had a different director um just maybe 6 months ago. And we are not sure what grants she has put in for. Would it be awful? I mean, would we still be able to get a grant if she's already put something in?
That's a tough one.
Okay.
If you have an idea of what organizations or agencies she applied to, I would contact them and just say, "Hi, our executive director has changed, and we don't have consistent information on what was applied for, and we're wondering, have we applied for a grant with you? Can you check for me?" I
Okay.
mean, that's exactly the kind of questions that I answer every day for people.
Okay.
It happens. I get contacted all the, I mean, staff turnover is a thing, especially in nonprofits. It
Right.
happens a lot because nonprofits usually can't afford to pay very well, which is why you look for that operating support. But you know, um, in that vein, uh, people are calling me up all the time saying, our board chair left, our executive director left. I need to set up a new person to deal with this grant. I think we have a grant. I don't know if we have a grant. Can you look? I mean, that's part of what I answer every day. So I expect those kind of questions, and I'm sure the other funders do as well.
Okay, good.
So don't be afraid to contact them.
Okay.
Do not be afraid to contact the funders. And, if you contact the funder and you get brushed off, then that tells you something you need to know, you
Right.
know, that they're not friendly and easy to deal with, that you're not going to maybe have a good experience with that funder, or maybe, you're not their type of demographic they're looking for to fund.
Right.
Whatever it is, that gives you good information, even if you do get brushed off. And if
Okay.
you don't, hopefully you'll find the help you need. And most organizations like Region 2 Arts Council, we're really dedicated to helping people write grants because we see ourselves as kind of like this first tier in writing grants for arts, especially for, individuals and organizations. And so we try and be really helpful and make it an easy process so that you can learn with us and then hopefully, go to the next level and get some more funding, higher funding, more than we can possibly, supply to you. That's always our hope. We're always hoping that our grantees will move on and get more funding and better funding from bigger agencies and bigger funders. I mean, when that happens, we're like, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so so that's how we look at it. And I'm sure there are other funders who do.
Okay.
So don't feel shy about reaching out. And remember, I was talking about like funding cycles. Funding cycles are really important, especially if you are trying to fund a project.
Mhm.
So you need to look and see if your project is going to fit into that funding cycle, is going to fit into their timeline. Are you going to get that check before that project is going to happen?
Right.
Are you going to get that check in time to be able to pay your artists who are coming, to be able to, rent that venue, you need to make sure that your timeline meshes with the timeline of the grant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So that's an important thing to look at, the funding cycle, and also the funding cycle, of when you're supposed to, do your final report, when the next grant comes out. I think most grants usually have an annual funding cycle, so that grant comes up every year. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it comes up quarterly. Sometimes it comes up every 2 years, every 5 years. So you need to look at that timeline and make sure that that meshes with what you're trying to do. So that's
Is
pretty important.
is there grant reporting? Do you have to report back to the people who gave you your grant in order to be able to reapply?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Almost always.
and that would maybe be in that application or something you'd know when you were
Because not
supposed to
only
have.
as funders do we want to be able to say, we've furthered our mission by this glorious, amazing project that these people have done that we funded. But we also want to be able to say, you know, look at all these great statistics and demographic information that we got from this. So yeah, and that we get that through our final reports and things like that that we ask you to do. So
Okay.
yes, there's always reporting. And it's important to do that reporting. Many, many, many funders, and this is important, do not fall into this trap.
Okay.
Many funders take their funding back if you don't do the final report. And you've already spent the funds, but you're still on the hook for them because you didn't do that final report. So do the final report. It's
Okay.
important. And, hopefully you want to be funded by this funder again. So you want to keep your relationship with them
Right,
friendly and happy and good because they're giving you money and you want
right.
more money. So
I would imagine that it would be before the next application cycle would be
you
starting.
would think that, but
I'm,
it's
I,
not
I'm
always
just
that
worried.
way.
Well, I'm worried about a grant that we have received, and it's the new application will be, I think it's due on November 15th. So shouldn't we already have a final report?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends. So you will have to ask that
Oh,
question or look
okay,
that up
all right.
but I would say call them and ask that question. When is our final report due? That's an important thing to know. And if you don't have that in the paperwork that you already have,
Okay.
then call them and ask that question because it's important. And
Okay.
sometimes you can apply again for the next annual thing, even though your final report isn't due until after that. I mean, our funding works that way.
Okay.
Not everybody's does. A lot of people, you have to have completed the project and turned in the final report before you can apply for the next thing. It depends. So you have to be on top of that. You have to read, or you have to call and ask, or send an email or a text, or however you usually communicate with that funder and figure that out. It's important. It's important. That reporting piece is important because if you miss your reporting, whether it's a final report or whatever it is, sometimes it's an interview that you need to do with them, um, then you've broken your relationship with that funder a little bit. And sometimes that can have, not bad circumstances. You can
Right.
fix it. You can call them and say, mea culpa, I was late. I'm sorry, things happened.
It's just
And
probably just
they'll
rude. It's like
understand
not
and
sending
they'll
a thank you note, right?
yeah. I
Right.
mean,
Just,
lots of times you can repair the relationship
right.
rather easily, but
Mhm.
sometimes, especially if you've let it go too long, you can
Mm.
fall into that misuse of funds category where they ask for the funds back and you've already spent them and you don't want to be there. So don't do that. Because, then it can get into even like legal
Well,
issues
yeah.
and you really don't want to go there. You don't want them sending collections on you or some sort of legal proceeding that you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And then you've got to prove that you did do what you said you were going to do. You just didn't do the final report.
Right, right, right.
So, I mean, you don't want to fall into that trap. So,
Sure.
keep a good relationship with your funder, keep lines of communication open. That's the best way to do it.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Yeah,
very good
absolutely.
advice.
And you know, another question that you should ask yourself as you're looking at these funders and the kinds of grants that they have available, you want to ask yourself, like, not only does the funding fit your timeline, are you going to be able to fund your project with this because you're going to get your check in time, et cetera, it fits, but also, um do you have the information, the time, the resources necessary to actually complete the application? Some applications are more complicated than others. So do your research and figure that out before you put yourself in a stress ball. You know what I mean? Like, you can start this application that's really complicated and you didn't read all of the instructions
Mhm.
and you didn't really understand what you were getting into, but now you're trying to get through it and you've got 2 days and it's due and other things are due and you have to do this thing for your kid and there's
That's
this
it, my
other
homework.
thing and you're staying up at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to write this thing and so don't put yourself in that stress ball. Do your research ahead of time. It will help you out so that you don't get stuck in that space. Nobody wants to be there and that stressed out. And we don't want you to be there as a funder either.
Right.
Do you have a
So
sense, say in Minnesota, how I mean, are there huge pots of grant money that no one's tapping into, or is it ultra competitive and you'll be lucky if you get anything? I mean, or is it somewhere in between?
That is such a hard question to answer, Shannon. So number one, through the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment that we have here in the state of Minnesota, there is a really big bucket of funds to fund artists and arts activity, which is amazing. And they don't have any place else in the country. We only have it here in Minnesota, and that is really cool. But depending on where you're applying and who you're applying with, the competition for those funds can be fierce, but it can also be variable. Honestly, I never know how many applications I'm going to get for one of our grants. Sometimes I'll be sitting there going, oh, we only have 5 applications and it's due tomorrow. Oh, I must be we really did terrible on promotions and nobody knows about this and we're only going to get 5 applications. I'll go to bed. I'll wake up in the morning when the grant is due. I'll have 25 applications. I mean, people leave things to the last minute. So I never know how many applications I'm going to get or how much competition there's going to be until it's actually the deadline. And I
Do
actually
you
know
get
how many
extra
applications.
credit for being on time or being early?
Probably never looked at it.
No,
No.
not for us, but maybe for
Okay.
other funders. I mean, again, it's part of reading and figuring that out, and doing that research.
Mhm.
But no, but usually when people are hasty with their applications and it comes in at the last minute, often those are applications that aren't as well planned out and as well written as other applications. So, I'm afraid we're
Hmm.
coming up on that 7 o'clock mark, and there's
This
a
has been
couple
good.
more things that I wanted to tell you before we sign off for today.
Mhm.
But other things when you're looking for funders is look at who and what they've funded in the past year. That's always a good place to start too, to know what they're looking for. Do you kind of, like, do you fit their profile? That's a good thing to look at. And for organizations, like I said, look at their mission statement. Does it align with yours? For artists, look for requirements like speaking engagements, open studios, exhibitions, concert, who owns the copyright to creative work that you created, under their grant funding, and do these fit with your business or career plan? So, those are some added things to look for as an individual. And then, though that's basically kind of finding a funder in a nutshell. So maybe we'll stop there for today.
Okay.
And then next month we'll talk about applying for grants. Um, but you've got a big part of that already in what we've talked about, and that is that idea of looking at those guidelines and really reading through those guidelines and making sure that, the funding fits the timeline that you have, and that you're eligible and those types of things. Those are the real biggies before you even start writing the grant, and finding the right funder. So, are there any questions before we sign off for today? No?
Thank you.
Just
Okay.
a lot of great information. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. And again, I will send out that PDF with all of those links that we looked at as well. And I hope that that helps you out. And certainly, I know some of you probably have grant deadlines coming up, and we
Mhm.
did talk about, the application, the actual like grant writing, how to tell your story, those types of things. We'll cover that in December. But if some of you have like an urgent need, I'm here for you. Contact me, email me, call me. I'm happy to talk over things with you. We can go over it, one-on-one if we need to. So
Okay.
just know that you can contact me as well.
I appreciate that.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very
I
much.
have
Thank
to
you.
find out about that final report
Thank-
first.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome, and good luck, everybody. Thank you again for coming tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Molly.